The room was dark except for the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the corner, draped with a torn bedsheet, stood a mirror. Robert Johnson wouldn't look at it. He never did. When someone asked why, he turned his back and whispered something nobody could quite hear. But those who knew him, they knew. They said he was afraid of what looked back. This is the story of a man who changed music forever, but couldn't face his own reflection. A man whose fear was so deep, so consuming, that it became part of the legend itself. And tonight, we're going to understand why that fear might have been the most important thing about him. My name is the voice behind Soul Chronicles, and I've spent years tracing the footsteps of Robert Johnson through the dusty roads of the Mississippi Delta. I've talked to descendants, studied rare photographs, listened to those 29 recordings until I could hear the tremor in his voice. And what I found wasn't just a story about superstition. It was a story about identity, about seeing yourself when you're not sure who you really are, and about the price of becoming something more than human. Before we walk down this shadowed path together, subscribe to Soul Chronicles and turn on notifications, because every story here holds a secret, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Leave a comment telling me which blues legend you want me to uncover, because in this channel, every soul has a song that needs to be told. Let me take you back to the Delta in the 1930s. Imagine heat that sits on your skin like a wet blanket. Imagine cotton fields stretching to the horizon and the sound of work songs drifting through the air. This was a world of sharecroppers and juke joints, of poverty so deep it felt like drowning, and music so powerful it felt like breathing. This was where Robert Johnson was born, where he grew up, and where he became afraid. The first time someone noticed was at a house party in Robinsonville, Mississippi. Robert was maybe 20 years old, playing guitar in the corner, while people danced and drank and forgot their troubles for a few hours. The room was hot, packed with bodies moving to the rhythm. And then someone brought in a mirror, one of those long-standing mirrors with the wooden frame, wanting to check their appearance before stepping outside. Robert stopped playing mid-song. His fingers went still on the strings. He stared at that mirror like it was a rattlesnake coiled in the corner. Then he stood up, guitar still in hand, and walked outside without a word. People laughed at first. They thought he was being peculiar, maybe had too much to drink, but the woman who lived there, she followed him out. She found him sitting on the porch steps, breathing hard, his hands shaking. She asked him what was wrong. He looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his face, and he said something she would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "Mirrors show you what you traded away." He said, if you look too long, you might see who you used to be, staring back with empty eyes, asking why you left them behind. She didn't understand, not then. But she would, once the stories started spreading about what happened at the crossroads. Now, if you know anything about Robert Johnson, you know about the Crossroads legend. The story goes that he met a man at the intersection of two roads at midnight. This man, tall and dressed in black, took Robert's guitar and tuned it. When he handed it back, Robert could play like nobody before or since, but the price was his soul. The deal was done. And some say that's when Robert Johnson stopped looking in mirrors. But let me tell you something most people don't know. Robert's fear of mirrors started before the crossroads. Way before. It started when he was just a boy, living with his mother in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. His mother worked in the fields, came home exhausted every night, barely had time to speak. Robert grew up half invisible, half wild, running through the Delta with other children who didn't have much except their imaginations. And one day, maybe he was 8 or 9 years old, he looked in a mirror and didn't recognize himself. Not because he'd changed, but because he realized he didn't know who he was supposed to be. You see, Robert's father wasn't around. His mother had married another man, but Robert knew that man wasn't his blood. He was born from a relationship his mother had with a man named Noah Johnson, but he was raised as Robert Spencer, then Robert Dodds. His name changed depending on who his mother was with. He moved from town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots. He was a boy without an anchor, without a clear identity. And when you don't know who you are, looking in a mirror becomes a dangerous thing, because the face staring back might ask you questions you can't answer. There's a story that when Robert was a teenager, he became obsessed with the blues. He'd follow older musicians around, begging them to teach him, but he wasn't good. Not yet. He'd pick up a guitar and play, and people would wince. Son House, one of the great bluesmen of that era, he remembered Robert trying to play at juke joints. Son House said Robert was acceptable on the harmonica, but terrible on guitar. So terrible that people would ask him to stop. Can you imagine that? Having this burning desire to play, this need to express something so deep you can barely breathe, but every time you try, people tell you to quit. That kind of rejection, it does something to a person. It makes you question whether you have any value at all. It makes you wonder if the person in the mirror is worth anything. But then Robert disappeared. He left the Delta for a while, went to stay with a man named Ike Zimmerman near Hazelhurst. And this is where things get strange, because Ike Zimmerman claimed he taught Robert guitar, but he said he taught him in graveyards, at night, sitting on tombstones while the dead rested below. Why graveyards? Some say it was the only quiet place where they could practice without disturbing anyone. Others say it was because Ike believed music was a conversation with the spirit world, and the graveyard was where that conversation was clearest. But there's another theory. Maybe Robert went to graveyards because he was already afraid of mirrors, already afraid of seeing himself, and in the darkness surrounded by the dead, there were no reflections, only the music, only the sound. Whatever happened during those months, when Robert Johnson came back to the Delta, he was different, transformed. He could play guitar like it was an extension of his soul. He could make a guitar laugh, cry, scream, and whisper. Son House himself admitted he couldn't believe it. He said it was like Robert had sold his soul to the devil to learn how to play. And that's when the Crossroads story took root. People said Robert must have made a deal, must have traded something precious for that kind of talent, because nobody gets that good that fast without help from the other side. But here's what I think. I think Robert Johnson was terrified of mirrors because he knew the truth. He knew he wasn't the same person anymore. He knew that to become a great musician, he had to kill off the boy who couldn't play. He had to bury Robert Spencer, Robert Dodds, the clumsy kid who people laughed at. And when you do that, when you sacrifice your old self to become someone new, the mirror becomes a graveyard. Every reflection is a ghost. There are multiple accounts from people who knew Robert in his later years. They all mention the mirrors. One woman who had a relationship with him said she kept a small mirror in her room, and every time Robert stayed over, he'd turn it to face the wall. She thought it was because he was vain, didn't want to see himself looking tired or rough. But one night she asked him directly. She said, "Robert, why do you hate mirrors so much?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he told her this. He said, "Mirrors remember." He said, "Every time you look in one, it captures a piece of you, keeps it trapped behind the glass. And if you've changed too much, if you've become someone completely different, all those old pieces start screaming. They want to know why you abandoned them. They want to come back." She thought he was speaking poetically, the way blues musicians do. But his hands were shaking when he said it. His voice had that edge of real fear. Do you know what it's like to be afraid of your own reflection? To walk into a room and automatically avoid any shiny surface because you're terrified of what you might see. Most people don't understand that kind of fear because most people have a stable sense of self. But Robert Johnson didn't. He was a collection of different names, different fathers, different versions of himself that he kept shedding like a snake sheds skin. And then there's the music itself. If you listen closely to Robert Johnson's recordings, and I mean really listen, you can hear two voices. There's the high, almost feminine falsetto, and then there's the deeper, rougher voice. Some musicologists say he was just using different registers for effect, but I think it's more than that. I think those two voices represent the split inside him, the old Robert and the new Robert, The boy who couldn't play and the man who sold everything to learn. They're both there, singing together, fighting for dominance. In his song, Me and the Devil Blues, Robert sings about walking side by side with the devil, but he also sings about his baby, about love and loss. It's like he's two different people in the same song. And maybe that's why he couldn't look in mirrors, because he'd see both of them staring back and he wouldn't know which one was real. There's a photograph of Robert Johnson. You've probably seen it. He's wearing a suit, holding a guitar, looking at the camera with this intense, almost haunted expression. It's one of only 2 confirmed photographs of him. And you know what's interesting? In that photograph, his eyes are avoiding direct contact with the lens. He's looking slightly to the side, like he's afraid the camera might capture something he doesn't want seen. Cameras were like mirrors to people back then. They believed cameras could steal your soul, trap it inside the image. And for someone like Robert, who already felt fragmented, who already feared seeing himself, having his picture taken must have been torture. But he did it anyway. Why? Maybe because part of him wanted to be remembered. Part of him wanted proof that he existed, that he was real, even if he couldn't look at that proof himself. The people who loved Robert Johnson often said he was running from something. He never stayed in one place long. He'd play at a juke joint for a few weeks, then vanish. He'd start a relationship with a woman, then disappear without warning. Some thought he was running from the law, or from angry husbands, or from debts, but I think he was running from himself. Because if you never stop moving, you never have to face your reflection. You never have to ask the hard questions. And here's the tragedy. Robert Johnson died at 27 years old, poisoned most likely by a jealous husband who gave him whiskey laced with strychnine. He died in agony, on his hands and knees, they say, barking like a dog as the poison destroyed his nervous system. It took him 3 days to die. But before he died, in those final lucid moments, someone brought him water. And in that room there was a mirror on the wall. One of the people there said Robert looked at it. For the first time in years, maybe the first time since he was a boy, he looked directly at his own reflection. And his expression changed. They said he looked relieved. They said he almost smiled. What did he see? Did he see the boy he used to be, welcoming him back? Did he see all the versions of himself finally merged into one? Or did he see nothing at all, just an ordinary man at the end of an extraordinary life, finally brave enough to face himself? We'll never know. But I think about that moment a lot. I think about what it means to spend your whole life afraid of your own image, and then at the very end, to finally look, to finally accept whatever's staring back. Robert Johnson's fear of mirrors became part of his legend, but it's also a window into understanding who he really was. He wasn't just a man who made a deal at the crossroads. He was a man fractured by his circumstances, by poverty and racism and instability, who found in music a way to become whole. But that wholeness came at a cost. It required him to leave behind everything he was, to step into a new identity that was so powerful, so consuming, that he could never look back without fear. And maybe that's the real crossroads, not a literal intersection where the devil waits, but the moment when you decide to become someone new, someone greater, knowing you can never return to who you were. That's the deal. That's the trade. And the mirror is just the reminder of what you gave up. Think about it. Every great artist goes through this. They kill their old self to birth their art. They sacrifice comfort, stability, sometimes sanity, to create something that outlives them. And in doing so, they become strangers to themselves. The person they were dies so the artist can live. And if you're Robert Johnson, if you're already unsure of who you are, already fractured, that process doesn't just transform you, it terrifies you. There's another song, Hellhound on My Trail, where Robert sings about being pursued by something dark and relentless. Most people think he's talking about the devil coming to collect his debt. But what if he's talking about his past self? What if the hellhound is the boy he used to be, the Robert who couldn't play, chasing him through the Delta, trying to drag him back to that life of obscurity and failure? And the only way to escape is to keep moving, keep playing, never stopping long enough for that hellhound to catch up. Never looking in a mirror long enough to see it reflected behind you, teeth bared, eyes hungry. The Delta is full of ghosts. If you go there now, you can still feel them. The spirits of people who worked themselves to death in cotton fields, who sang their pain into songs that became the foundation of American music. Robert Johnson is one of those ghosts. But he's unique because he became a ghost while he was still alive. He haunted himself, and the mirror was the proof. I walked through the Delta last year, trying to trace Robert's path. I went to the juke joints where he played, or at least the land where they used to stand. I went to the graveyards where he might have practiced. I stood at crossroads feeling foolish, but wanting to understand. And in every place I thought about mirrors, about how we see ourselves, about how sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's out there in the dark, but what's inside us, reflected back. If Robert Johnson were alive today, would he still be afraid of mirrors? In our world of selfies and social media, where we're constantly confronted with our own image, would he be able to function, or would the fear be so overwhelming that he'd retreat completely, vanish into the wilderness where no reflection could find him? I think the fear would be worse, because we live in an age of constant self-examination, constant comparison, constant pressure to define and redefine ourselves. Robert Johnson had the luxury of avoiding mirrors. He could turn them to the wall, walk out of rooms, stay away from still water. But we can't. We're surrounded by our own reflections, judged by them, defined by them. And maybe that's why his story still matters, because we're all a little afraid of what we see when we look too closely. We're all carrying multiple versions of ourselves, trying to figure out which one is real. We're all standing at our own crossroads, deciding who to become and what to leave behind. Robert Johnson made his choice. He chose the music. He chose transformation, and he paid for it with his peace of mind, his ability to see himself without fear, and ultimately, his life. But what he created, those 29 songs recorded in hotel rooms in Texas, they outlived the fear. They outlived him. They became immortal. And isn't that the ultimate irony? A man who couldn't face his own reflection created music that reflects the soul of an entire nation. A man who was afraid to see himself gave us a way to see ourselves, our pain, our longing, our defiance in the face of impossible circumstances. When you listen to Crossroad Blues or Love in Vain or Stones in My Pathway, you're hearing a man who transformed his fear into art. You're hearing someone who looked into the abyss of his own identity and instead of running away, played guitar at it until it became beautiful. That's power. That's magic. Call it a deal with the devil if you want, but I think it's something more human and more heroic than that. It's the power of choosing to create even when you're terrified, even when you can't face yourself, even when you know the price is going to be higher than you can afford. The last recording session Robert Johnson ever did was in June of 1937 in Dallas, Texas. By then, he was already a legend in the juke joints of the Delta. People came from miles around to hear him play. And in that hotel room, with the recording equipment set up and the engineers waiting, Robert played some of the most haunting music ever committed to record. There was a mirror in that room. I've seen photographs of the location, and I wonder if Robert saw it when he walked in. I wonder if he felt that familiar spike of fear, that urge to turn and leave. But he stayed, he played, and whatever he was running from, whatever he was afraid to face, he channeled it into those songs. You can hear it, the fear, the longing, the sense of a man divided, but you can also hear the determination, the refusal to let the fear win. Robert Johnson might have been afraid of mirrors, but he wasn't afraid of the truth. And the truth is there in every note, every lyric, every slide of his fingers on the guitar strings. He was saying, "This is who I am, all of me. The boy who couldn't play and the man who sold everything to learn. The person I was and the person I became. The soul that was traded and the soul that remains. I'm all of it and I'm none of it. and I'm going to sing it all into existence whether you understand or not. That's bravery. That's what it means to be an artist. And that's why Robert Johnson's fear of mirrors matters. Because it's not really about mirrors at all. It's about having the courage to become yourself, even when yourself is fragmented and frightening and impossible to fully comprehend. So many people today struggle with identity. We're told to find ourselves, to be authentic, to stay true to who we are. But what if you don't know who you are? What if you're a collection of contradictions, a person who changes depending on the situation, someone who feels like an imposter in your own skin? Then what? Robert Johnson didn't have the answer, but he had the music. And in that music, he found a way to exist without needing a clear, stable identity. He became the sound. He became the emotion. And in doing so, he transcended the fear of seeing himself. Maybe that's what we all need to learn. That it's okay to be multiple people. It's okay to shed your old self and become someone new. It's okay to be afraid of what you see in the mirror as long as you don't let that fear stop you from creating, from loving, from living. Robert Johnson was afraid of mirrors, but he wasn't afraid of the darkness. He wasn't afraid of the crossroads. He wasn't afraid of transformation. And in the end, he wasn't even afraid of death. He looked it in the face, just like he finally looked in that mirror, and he accepted it. That's the lesson. That's what changed everything. Not the deal at the crossroads, not the supernatural talent, but the willingness to keep going even when you're terrified of what you might see. The willingness to create even when you don't know who's creating. The willingness to be a mystery, even to yourself. Before I leave you tonight, I want you to think about your own mirrors. Not the physical ones, but the metaphorical ones. The things that reflect back who you really are, stripped of pretense and performance. Are you afraid of them? Do you turn them to the wall like Robert did? Or do you stare into them, accepting every version of yourself, past and present, integrated into one complicated, beautiful whole? Robert Johnson's story is a ghost story. But the ghost isn't the devil at the crossroads. It's Robert himself, haunting his own life, unable to fully inhabit his body because he was too afraid to see what he'd become. And yet, despite that fear, maybe because of that fear, he created music that still makes us feel something almost a century later. That's immortality. Not the preservation of your image, but the preservation of your soul in sound. And maybe that's why Robert was afraid of mirrors, because mirrors only show the surface. They can't show the soul. And his soul was already pouring out through his guitar into those songs where it would live forever. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about fear and identity and the price of transformation, subscribe to Soul Chronicles and hit that notification bell. Leave a comment telling me which blues legend you want me to explore next, because every story here is a journey into the shadows where truth and legend meet. And if you found something valuable in Robert Johnson's fear, something that reflected your own struggles back at you, then his music did what it was meant to do. It connected us across time, across pain, across the terrifying beauty of becoming who we're meant to be. The Mississippi Delta is quiet now. The juke joints are mostly gone. The cotton fields are still there, but the songs that rose from them have spread across the world. And somewhere in that music, Robert Johnson is still playing, still running from his reflection, still creating something more powerful than fear. Listen closely. You might hear him. And when you do, don't be afraid to look in the mirror, because whatever you see staring back, whatever version of yourself you've been avoiding, that's the person who has a song to sing. That's the person who stands at the crossroads, ready to become something more. That's the person Robert Johnson was trying to find. And maybe, just maybe, in those final moments before he died, when he finally looked in that mirror and smiled, he found them. The road goes on, the crossroads wait, and the mirrors remember everything. But the music transcends it all. That's what Robert Johnson taught us. That's what changed everything. Not his fear, but what he did with it. not his fragmented identity, but how he turned it into art. And that's a lesson worth remembering, worth carrying with you, worth singing into the night when you're alone and afraid and unsure of who you are, because you're not alone. Robert Johnson walked that road before you, and his music is still playing, still guiding us through the darkness, still teaching us that it's okay to be afraid, as long as we don't let the fear silence the song. Walk on, traveler. The crossroads are calling, and somewhere in the distance you can hear a guitar playing, the sound rising from the grave, from the past, from the mirror you're too afraid to look into. But when you finally gather the courage to look, when you finally face whatever's staring back, you'll understand. You'll understand everything Robert Johnson was trying to tell us. That transformation is terrifying. That identity is fluid. That the person you become might not recognize the person you were. But that's not a curse. That's not a deal with the devil. That's just the price of living fully, of creating truly, of loving deeply, and it's a price worth paying. So go ahead, look in the mirror, see all the versions of yourself, the past and the present, the failures and the triumphs, the fear and the courage. See it all, accept it all. And then, like Robert Johnson, pick up your instrument, whatever it is, and play. Play until the fear transforms into beauty. Play until the fragmentation becomes harmony. Play until you forget to be afraid. Because that's when the real music begins. That's when you stop running from your reflection and start creating your legacy. That's when you understand that Robert Johnson wasn't afraid of mirrors because he was cursed. He was afraid because he was brave enough to change and honest enough to know it. The story ends here. But the music never does. It goes on and on, through time, through space, through every heart that hears it and understands. Robert Johnson is still playing somewhere in the Delta. His reflection is still trapped in that final mirror, smiling with relief. And his soul is still singing, telling us it's okay to be afraid, okay to transform, okay to become someone new. Just don't forget to play. Don't forget to create. Don't forget to sing your truth, even when you're not sure what that truth is anymore. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's what happens when you're afraid of mirrors, but brave enough to face the music. And the music, as always, is what remains.